Welcome to everyone here from concept to shelf mastering cosmetics labeling. Just a quick introduction. My name is Amanda. I'm the Senior Enterprise Sales Consultant here with Artwork Flow. I'm joined with Kristin Peacock. Kristin, I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm the Director of Corporate Program Development at Image Skincare. I've been with Image Skincare for a little over 6 years in a variety of roles. And I've been in the personal care industry for about 15 years.
Awesome. And then just a quick agenda for everyone that's joining us. So what we will be talking about today are the ins and outs of project management and personal care, the journey of a cosmetics label from ideation to print, regulatory requirements like MOCRA and how to best prepare for them. And then we'll take a couple of questions towards the end of today's call. But Kristin, I'll kick it over to you if you want to kind of walk us through a day in the life in a personal care brand.
Sure, absolutely. As I mentioned, I've been in project management for a number of years in a variety of different roles. Most recently, I've taken on all of our packaging labeling. And so I am heavily focused on that at the moment. But, just day to day on project management, we're looking at a variety of different things, particularly starting off with reviewing the project details to kind of define the requirements and deadlines for these projects. We're constantly collaborating with cross-functional team members. I work very closely with our creative team. Sometimes my designers get involved in the creative process as well. And we work very, very closely with our supply chain and operations team so that we can ensure that we're meeting all of our timelines and getting things ordered on time so that we can eventually roll them out into market. It's super important to continually maintain organization through all of your projects and really planning and keeping up the task management. On here, you can see a couple of examples of some tools that I use. We are constantly using Excel to kind of track, like on a broad sense, the project. So we really know what's going on over the next couple of days, weeks, and months. And we share that with our cross-functional team members so that they kind of also know what's going on. We collaborate and see, has anything shifted on this list, but it's a comprehensive list of everything that we've got going on. And then we also use Asana to really dial into the projects, make sure that we have all of the details on there because having those requirements and having the scope of work is incredibly important. That way you're not kind of second guessing things later down the pathway and eating up that time that you don't have or may not have to be asking those questions late in the game. So that's why creating timelines and really identifying the critical path for a project is so important. And then, of course, you're continually monitoring the progress of the projects to stay on schedule. Not pictured on here, we do use Artwork Flow to really dive into the details and compare against the versions of the artwork that we have going and make any of those edits through that system. So there's a lot involved in the day-to-day of project management. We're dealing with, a number of projects at any given time. Some are wrapping up, some are just starting. We consider every artwork change that we're making a project because there could be a number of things that are changing as a result of, maybe there's a regulation change that causes a formula change, or there's something that new that we have identified that needs to be on packaging. So it's, like I said, very important to understand the scope, understand your timelines, and to continually keep monitoring the progress of the projects.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristin. Can you talk to us a little bit about the journey of a cosmetics label?
Absolutely. So we really start at evaluating a die line. So as our operations team and our marketing team is out there selecting packaging, we really ask them to keep into consideration the amount of real estate that we're going to have to put all the required information and any desired information on the package. Right. So a perfect example is something that I got really recently. We're looking into doing some travel sizes for some new products that we have. And the travel size die line that I received is rather tight. It actually ends up being smaller in terms of real estate than what we have for our sample size products. So, got back in contact with our supply chain team, said, hey, can we reach out to the vendor? Let's see if there's any wiggle room on this die line. If we can get maybe, a quarter of an inch above or below would be super helpful. Unfortunately, in this circumstance, there wasn't a lot that we could do to try to adjust that die line. So, it comes back to us now to try to figure out how we can get all of the required information implemented onto the artwork. So, really evaluating the guidelines and knowing what you have to work with is super important. And then we kind of move into concept development. Sometimes my team gets involved in this. Sometimes, we are provided the concept. But there's a couple of different rounds. A lot of this is, internal back and forth between, maybe the design team and the creative team and the marketing team, really trying to identify what it is that we want in terms of concept. So that's where you get into sort of this design refinement. So once we've got some good ideas in terms of concept, you're kind of refining, and it might be something where you're pulling, some elements of one design that you like and some elements from another design that you like, and trying to marry the two and eventually come up with a couple of different options. And then we go into kind of a stakeholder presentation where we're laying out the options for everybody, welcoming the feedback and maybe some ideas on how else we could refine things. Once final concept is selected, we go into concept execution. So we're really spending the time trying to understand all of the design elements that need to go onto the package, as well as all of the regulatory requirements and any romance copy that we desire putting on there. The romance copy in our organization comes from our marketing team, and we work very closely with our head of regulatory to ensure that the product labeling is compliant. But before we pass that off to marketing and regulatory reviews, we do an internal review. We want to make sure that we're limiting the amount of times that we're going back and forth as much as possible. So we're really not, putting too much stress on that timeline for ourselves, because we do still ultimately need to turn all of the artwork around by that date. So once we pass it off to marketing and regulatory, we're really hoping for limited comments. Of course, if there's anything that's on there that needs to be changed, we want to make sure that we get that done. Then we're getting into, like I said, the kind of final edits and then the approval of the artwork. At this stage, we're generally setting this up so that we can get some kind of pre-production sample of the artworks on their components and or their cartons. Want to be able to really touch and feel and see what is going to be representative of that packaging in market. So it's a good opportunity it can help to narrow down certain finishes when it comes to cartons. Maybe you want to have soft touch, but you're not sure what that's going to feel and look like on your package, or maybe you want to add an element of foil. So it's a really good opportunity at the PPS point to understand that. You would go back and then make those kind of edits to finishes or anything that you felt needed to be updated after seeing PPS. And then you're submitting really the final artwork for proofing and approval, at which point you're really not trying to make any changes. Proof is your last opportunity to see if there's anything that's a little off or wonky on your artwork to correct. And then obviously we're trying to get it into production. So it's kind of the life cycle of the label there.
Definitely a lot that goes into it, even for those small travel bottles that you were saying. Do you want to kind of talk to us a little bit about what we're looking at here, Kristin?
Yeah, this is a great example of one of our product artworks. To the left, you're seeing the primary packaging. It's important that we put things on there like net weight and the product identifier. You'll see there's directions for use, as well as caution statements on there and an address at the bottom. You may also see the PAO symbol, representative of shelf life. Super important things to put onto the package so that the consumer knows what to expect out of the product. And then on the carton on the right-hand side, you'll see there's a lot more detail. This was our opportunity to place additional languages onto the packaging. This particular product goes into the European market. So, a little hard to see on here, but there's Dutch and German as well as French on here. You would really want to make sure that you're putting the languages of the markets that you're entering onto the package so that it's really easy for the consumer. Of course, this is also where we have our ingredient listing. It's an opportunity to put some romance copy on here because you tend to have a little bit more real estate to be able to add those kinds of things. So just jumping back for 1 second, not sure, want to put a little question out to the group, not sure whether you guys follow a similar kind of workflow for labeling. Would love to hear from you all. Please throw some of those answers into the chat if you don't mind. And but yeah, this is a really great example of what we have for packaging labeling for cosmetic.
Awesome. And you talked a little bit about some of the ingredients that had to go on there and some of like the icons that had to go onto the labeling. You want to walk us through some of the regulatory affairs that are specific for cosmetics?
Yeah, we'll be super high level on this, but there are a number of things that really need to go onto the package. There's a lot that is very similar for the EU, US, and Canada. Those are some of the biggest markets that we are in. So I'll just kind of identify those for you. You really need to make sure that the product identity is there. It's as simple as having something that says like facial cleanser on there. That way your consumer knows what the product is that they're getting. You need to have an inky declaration somewhere. So that folks can see what the ingredient listing is. You know, it's a required call out. Net quantity, folks need to understand how much of the product that they're getting. You do need to have some kind of manufacturer distributor information on there so that there is a contactable, you know, entity on the package. Country of origin, really need to know where the products are being made for a lot of the same reasons. As I said, with the manufacturer, that you need to understand from a contactable point of view. And then instructions for use. Of course, your consumer needs to know how to use the product, as well as any warnings and precautions. And warnings could be as simple as, you know, keep out of eyes. We have also, in my experience, put on warnings dependent upon a particular ingredient. We've had AHA warnings on the labeling, as well as, you know, maybe a call out for soy, just so that the end consumer knows. And then you'll get to kind of the function claims, which you really just need to ensure can be substantiated and are compliant with regulations. So you need to make sure that it's that truth in advertising, right? That you have something that you can support your claim with.
Awesome. And then you want to walk us through some of the differences from Canadian labels, EU labels, US labels, what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, one of the big differences with Canadian labeling is that they actually need to have both English and French, since those are the national languages for that country. So you do need to have French on the labeling in Canada. Some additional requirements in the EU for cosmetics are a PAO symbol or a best before date. The PAO symbol is that little jar that you see at on the screen there. And typically you'll put in the amount of months that the product is good for shelf life. Also, the best before date would obviously mean something, you know, product is good best before that date. These are things that are discovered through testing, particularly stability testing. So something that you would get involved in with your product development team. They would be able to pass that information along to you, what would be required there to go on the package. And then you'll also see right below there a little open book and hand symbol. This is something that can be utilized if you have additional information or additional languages that you just can't fit onto your primary or secondary packaging. It allows you another piece of labeling to be able to expand upon. Like I said, put additional languages on there, and it indicates to the consumer to look inside to find that leaflet or pamphlet. You will have language requirements in the EU as well. So whatever country that you're intending to enter into with your product, you would want to have that language labeling as well. And then the name and address of a responsible party if you are not if you do not have a location in the EU. That's important to identify so that there is somebody that can be contacted in the EU should, you know, something happen with the product.
Got it.
And here's a good example. Yeah, this is a good example of some OTC labeling, which is a little bit different, and it's not something that you have in the EU. The OTC, over-the-counter drug, you see that a lot with sunscreens. You can see it with some acne products that use benzoyl peroxide or salicylic acid. Those require a little bit different labeling in the US. Those are where you start to see those drug facts labels. But in the EU, there is not a designation for that. So it is treated still like a cosmetic. So you can see here the little bit of a difference. We've got a drug facts label on the US labeling, whereas the European labeling looks very much like the artwork that we showed you before from Vital C as a cosmetic.
Got it. Thanks, Kristen. I actually have a question for you. So there's a lot that has to go on to these labels from a regulatory standpoint. How do you keep up with all of that? Or if those regulatories, that information changes?
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to keep track of. Luckily, we have not had too many requirements stateside that have changed over the years. But we work with a compliance group in the EU, and we work with a compliance group in Canada that helps to advise us for some of those things. We also have a head of regulatory in our organization that stays on top of all of the labeling. She knows very well the ins and outs of the US requirements, and she's very handy with the European and Canadian labeling as well. But like I said, we do use some outside resources that keep us abreast of some of the changes that are going on with regulations.
Got it. And as we talk about like changes to regulations, I know I've been having a lot of conversations at Art Workflow around MOCRA. I'm sure you have as well. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, MOCRA has been such a big, important thing that's come out. It's been some 20 years, I think, since we've had any instruction from the FDA, any new news on the cosmetics front, right? So some of the big things that have come out of MOCRA for labeling purposes are the need to have adverse event reporting contact information. You need to have a domestic address on their telephone number or some kind of electronic contact. Could be a website, but there has to be some form of being able to report any adverse events. The compliance deadline for that is coming up. It is at the end of this year. So very, very important to start getting your labeling updated with all of that information. There's also the disclosure of fragrance allergens. We're still waiting on the FDA to produce its proposed list of those allergens that need to be disclosed. It's due really at the end of this week. So hopefully we all hear something here within the next few days. There is usually about a 6-month period for them to finalize this list, and then roughly about a year, it could be typically a year before it would come into effect. So you'll have a little bit of time, a grace period to get all of your labeling compliant. Now, these new requirements do not supersede any state requirements. So, you still need to abide by like California's Prop 65 requirements. The state requirements still remain. So important to make sure that we're paying attention to those requirements as well.
Awesome. So definitely quite a few changes. And I know I'm interested to see what that allergen list is going to look like as well. Kristen, can you talk to us a little bit about, since these regulations are new, what happens if you don't include them on a packaging? What could happen from there?
Sure. Non-compliance does have consequences for it. It could be anything from them not allowing you to put your product onto the market, or a recall or fines. So it's very important to make sure that you do try to get your labeling updated as soon as possible.
Got it. And, that's really helpful to hear in some of the conversations we've had at Art Workflow, and really why we introduced Comply AI. So Comply AI lets you build out rule books that'll include this information. So those different allergens, even some of those different symbols that you talked about, having different font requirements that might be, regulated for your label, and being able to have those rule books have an AI check against your label. So that way you make sure those allergens are included, your fonts are up to par, any barcodes that might be needed to be on the artwork, making sure all those elements are there. So really just being able to have the AI check give you that extra security that all your information is there, and also expedite that process too. But I think that's pretty much it from Kristen and myself. I know we have a couple of questions, so we can definitely get to those. I know the first question I saw, Kristen, was, you're using Excel and Asana. Does that happen to overwhelm you with using too many tools?
It can be complicated, but the way that we have it kind of divided up, it works well for us. So what we use Excel for is really when we're discussing things in a cross-functional manner. It's kind of a master list, if you will. And then we're putting everything into Asana. My designers feel like they enjoy using that system much better because they can really, list out all of the tasks. It's a better way for them to be able to keep track of the projects that they're working on. I have 2 designers on my team right now. So there's a little bit of, switch hitting going on sometimes if we have to pull one designer for a different project, and it just allows us the flexibility to determine who's working on what and to keep up with the status of that. Whereas the Excel program, we're just kind of using Excel as a master list, if you will, of all of our ongoing projects.
Awesome. Another question was text size requirements seem to not be followed by that many brands. How do you handle that? Kristin, do you want to take that one? And then I can also add a little bit about how.
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's something that I think a lot of brands face, right? We're in this crunch to try to fit so many different things on there. And you still want the design to look really nice, but you do have those requirements of what needs to be on labeling. So unfortunately, sometimes we forego some of like the things that we would like to be on packaging, be it a romance copy, so that we can make way for all of the required, like, required elements to be on there at the size that they're supposed to be. I know it definitely gets difficult when it comes to sample sizes and travel sizes. The smaller you go, especially if you do not have like a secondary component to go along with it, where you have a little bit more real estate to put things on there. I do know that it's a challenge. Sometimes we mess with the leading a little bit. We try to tighten the space that we have to see how much more we can to fit on there, but you still really want everything to be legible because you never want to be misleading to the consumer.
Awesome. And I know that's also something that we have built out within Comply AI, so that way you can dictate what those requirements should be and making sure that they meet those expectations on your labeling. So we have another question. How would you rank the EU, US, and Canada markets in terms of ease of project management while working on labeling?
Well, the U.S. is probably the easiest one to manage. So just be out front with that. There's just not as many requirements there. The EU is a little stricter, but I have actually found that Canada meeting the requirements for Canada, specifically on those drug and natural health products. Oh my goodness, what a challenge that is. So there's just so many requirements, particularly when it comes to text size, fonts, the required information that needs to be on there, and making sure that you're getting everything on there in 2 languages. It's very, very tough. But the US is probably the easiest until you get to OTCs. Then it becomes a little more complicated.
Awesome. We have another question. I think we highlighted a little bit of it, but maybe we can go in a little further. How have your labeling requirements changed for sunscreens in the EU, considering they are classified as cosmetics across the pond and not OTC?
Yeah. So unfortunately, what it's sort of, I think, everybody's dream, probably every brand's dream, particularly from like a financial aspect, right? To have one set of packaging, a global package, if you will. And when it comes to those types of products, it's just not possible, right? So what we do is we have domestic packaging artwork and we have European packaging artwork, and that's kind of how we split the difference there.
Awesome. And then a last question I see here, what could be some of the major bottlenecks that brands can avoid in their label approving and reviewing process? Any best practices that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as you're being very clear and direct about what you're presenting, you don't want to give too much optionality either. The more options you give, the more people are going to start to think and question and want to see some other renditions of things. So if you come together with a really nice tight package and what you're presenting, it tends to lead to a quicker approval process. I think if you're, you really lay out what it is you want and what you're asking them to approve as well. Important to just be, clear with your communication.
Awesome. And then another one, how do you manage state-wise regulations in terms of updates? For example, California expanded its fragrance allergen list.
Yes, yes. So fortunately for us, we use a lot of essential oils and aromatic extracts. So we've been kind of fortunate in that we've been working on the allergen list ourselves for some time, like making sure that we're including those things because we have such a good relationship with our compliance partners in the EU. And the EU has a lot more of that kind of requirement of disclosing that information. We're tending to do that ourselves already on our US packaging, but it's definitely tough. Definitely tough.
Awesome. And then I can take this question from Alex. So Alex is wondering if there is an approval form or approval process details that we can share there. He's trying to redesign his process to streamline review and approval. Alex, that is something that we do have built out within Art Workflow in addition to Comply AI. Maybe we can toss in the chat a quick, calendar link or a link that we can book some time to talk about that a little bit more. But short answer, yes, we do have that ability within Art Workflow. Kristin, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, and I've actually experienced that. So we're still ramping up our workflow, been able to use it for a few different projects. But yes, it works really well. It's nice to have, hopefully we'll be able to migrate a little more out of the Excel. Our ultimate goal is to really bring our supply chain team into being able to have that line of visibility, and then hopefully eventually vendors as well, so they can just have a direct repository.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristin. And Alex, we do have that link in there. So if you want, we can book some time and we can actually show you what that would look like. And then we have a question from Tony. How difficult has it been to factor in CBD regulations into the mix with US and EU?
Unfortunately, I do not have that experience because none of our products have that, but I do know that it is quite a challenge. So I wish I would share a little bit more information on it, but I wish you all of the best with that, because I do know that there is a layer of complexity there as well.
Yeah, and Tony, we've spoken to some customers from at Art Workflow that are handling that. So if you also want to jump into that link, we can book some time to discuss that a little further. But our Comply AI has been a great tool to help companies navigate through that as well. Awesome. We'll wait another minute or so, Kristin, and see if there's any other questions.
Sure.
Okay. We have one from Louis. Does the information of the person of contact for MOCA requirements need to be updated on all packaging, or is the information on our website sufficient?
I do believe it needs to be on package. So I know that we have internally gone through and started making sure that we have all of our information on our package, our address, the company information, but we have gone through and put a contact phone number for adverse event reporting on our packaging. So I do believe it needs to actually be on package.
Awesome. And Louis, if you do follow Art Workflow on LinkedIn or any kind of social media, we're also kind of keeping track of some of those requirements. And as we learn about it a little bit more, we've been posting and sharing that out as well. So definitely give us a follow so we can hopefully get that information to you too. Awesome. I don't see any other questions. But Kristin, if you have any final thoughts or notes or things that you wanted to share before we adjourn with our audience.
No, it's just been such a pleasure, and thank you all for joining. It was great to be able to discuss this a little further and to highlight what a wonderful job Art Workflow does.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristin. Thanks for taking the time to join with us. And like I said, definitely give us a follow on LinkedIn or any of our socials. We have the link in there. If you do want to book a demo, take a look at what Comply AI does, or any of our other features, we'd be happy to connect with you. Thanks, everyone.